I'd like to reintroduce Gregg back to the stage, as well as we have the pleasure of hosting Stephen from IDP and Sarah again from Lego. So. So unfortunately, only have 15 minutes here. We had planned a little bit more, so I'll cut down the questions. But first one, my favorite, to put you all on the spot. We heard a few pitches today on some very concrete needs, but any reactions or feedback based on that, as you heard them present their ideas?
Well, first of all, I'm not Maggie, so I feel like I could have my Oprah moment, spend Qatar money, you get $1,000 and you get $5,000. No, I mentioned the other day the importance for learners to be endlessly curious, and I think I'm fairly voracious in learning and traveling and reading, but this morning and the entire conference has reminded me how much more work I have to do. How much you all have provoked me about my thinking, about the places where I need to look, about the people from whom I need to learn. So I'm feeling deeply humbled about needing to learn more.
Great.
I would just add on to what Gregg is saying by absolutely. This is only ever the start of a conversation. The foundation that I work for takes a long time before we put a funding package together for agencies. So it might start with a pitch, but more often it starts with our pitch. We put out we want this to be done, and then we invite others to have the conversation. So that doesn't mean, though, that we can't give really thoughtful and feedback or start a conversation with different innovators who have great ideas that might be influencing the way that we think and the way that we think about how we want to make impact in the world.
Well, I think that throughout my time here, one of the great things is to see there's a fruit salad of innovations. I mean, it's quite amazing to see all these ideas. One of the things that comes to mind is opportunity. As a funder as well, I see a lot of opportunity, and 100 of them, that's big. So what it communicates to me is that there is not a limitation on ideas. In the contexts where I work, there's a lot of problems, and so if I come to this space and I see 100 of opportunities that could solve these problems, I think that this 100 innovations that can solve these problems. This is an opportunity, and I think that this is what I call that fruit salad of ideas.
I love that. I love that analogy. So the next one, we all love to talk about funding, and it's everyone's favorite lever for growth, but that's obviously not the whole picture, and you've all kind of talked to me either publicly or privately about that this weekend. But some ideas, not just in how you support the organizations that you fund, but things that you've seen those organizations do outside of funding when maybe it's not a good time for you to invest, or once you've invested, and seeing some of the impressive ways that they've grown without money. Any ideas or suggestions for folks there?
Maybe I'll start by saying that in our experience, one of the key things is, depending on the innovation, sometimes it just takes some support in terms of technical support or advice. And funders have a great network of these technical supports. So we've had the opportunity of looking and, getting pitches from innovators, and then being able to see that we could help you with that technical support and advice. It's just maybe getting some expert hours to just get your innovation to the stage that is more attractive and appealing to a funder, or gets you out of the door to a great funding opportunity. So I think technical assistance is possible, and as an innovator, you need to do that self-reflection in where you are and seeing actually what you need, and also being open to those advices.
I think it's so critical to talk plainly about money. And I'd add one thing to the things that I heard this morning. That is that funders and donors are only successful to the extent that we're privileged to be able to support your work and achieve meaningful results. So as you think about your pitches, think about how you're serving the self-interest of the donors who are privileged to support your work. So I think that's critical to note. In terms of non-financial things, in addition to the technical assistance, we use words like partnership and collaboration so much that I feel like they become hollow. And yet, when we really invest in them, and I've been on the fundraising side, so right, when you really invest that time and energy, it can, you get to use other people's money and resources and time. I've seen the Pittsburgh Public Schools, for example, work brilliantly in developing partnerships with out-of-school organizations to entirely rethink what they're able to deliver to their students during summer learning hours and throughout the school year. They've been able to do things that money alone wouldn't have helped them to do, and being able to work with those partners in genuinely meaningful ways. And then, we've not really talked a lot about advocacy and policy here, but right? I mean, this really comes down to public money and public budgeting. And how are we as organizations and collectively as a field advocating for the public dollars that our public schools and the field of education and learning broadly needs?
I would just point out two differentiators. The LEGO Foundation funded about 600 or right around 600 social entrepreneurs in 2014. And now we look ahead to 2019, 5 years later, and two of them are getting big amounts of money from the foundation. The rest have moved off in their own places, but I think the differentiators there are those that are really paying attention to their business model. Do they know how they want to grow and why, and how much of it is growth of their ideas and how much of it is growth of their organizations, and really get that sharp. And then the other thing is that, as funders, especially as funders in the philanthropy space, we have a lot of time, energy, and effort for understanding impact. And I think the better you can tell how you're learning and how you're getting through that impact story, it does engender a conversation and sort of an ethos in an organization that we're really looking for.
Great, and I'm glad you brought up impact. Like, really leads me to my next question, which is, as you evaluate organizations for impact, whether you've already invested in them or are thinking about it, what are you looking at there? Is it depth? Is it breadth? Is it a combination? What's the right balance of what to measure? Because measurement also, as Gregg's mentioned, can have some drawbacks.
Yeah, well, I touched on it in in my presentation. At the LEGO Foundation, we look for significant impact, so we want to see a specific knowledge, attitude, behavior change, and that has to be clear and set out at the beginning. We want to look at impact that's lasting. So those knowledge, attitudes, and behavior, can you show that endures over time? And the third piece is sustainability. Like, how is it that you're creating an ecosystem around something in order to have other actors continue to pick it up and give it momentum?
And this is maybe an example, as my colleague says, if you've met one funder, you've met one funder, right? So we care a lot about evaluation and research and findings, but I'm also lucky to work on behalf of trustees who recognize that not everything needs to be measured, or there's proxy research in the world for the types of results we should anticipate if we're lucky enough to support an organization. And unless we ourselves are willing to invest in the research side of things, we should have a reasonable expectation of the type of results that are negotiated with the organizations that we support. And sometimes when you're investing in people and the relationships, that's good enough. And the world tells us that that's good enough.
Yeah, what I'll add to that is to say that that is a very big question, and for funders as well, it's important, because you want to see if you're making any impact, and how do you measure that? It's a big question. But as a private foundation, we have also committed to say that we are willing to embrace risk, and to also say that we will invest smartly, and we will commit to smart philanthropy, which also means that we need to be patient with our money and our investments, and say that, hey, it will take time for your innovations to gather the right momentum to reach the impact we want to see, and we are willing to come with you on that trajectory. So impact is important, but I think that the funding space should also be willing to take the risks with these innovators and come along with them on that journey. And that's one of the key things that we are committed doing. And I think it will support these great ideas. Yes.
Patience is so critical. You know, Vishal yesterday said this is generational work. We're fooling ourselves if we're going to achieve this in 1 year, 5 years, 20 years. And that patient capital is so critical.
Very important.
Yeah, I also just want to highlight that at least the philanthropists I hang out with, I don't think that you should confuse performance and impact. Performance isn't necessarily always about getting impact. Performance is about being able to say what your impact is as much as anything else. Like, it's important to pull those apart when you're thinking through what do you want to try to achieve and how do you know whether you're achieving that.
A really great point. Thank you. Last question, since you've all been in the field for quite a while, and we all kind of focus on education, but I'm sure you think about your roles and how they're changing as well. How do you see giving and education investing changing over the next 5, 10, 20 years to help kind of this group adapt and help grow the ecosystem long term? You don't have to go first.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I see and I envision, and it's already happening, and this is funders collaborating to support innovators. This is something that is becoming much more important for funders. It reduces risk. It leverages our comparative technical abilities in taking those decisions. And I think that going forward, funders would be working with other funders. There would be a more collaborative space in funding these innovations. And I think that as we seek systemic change, as we seek system-wide change and broader change, it is these collaboration within funders that would be the way forward. And that's also to say that as you innovate, you should need to think of how you can co-innovate with each other. It's not about your private space of innovation or the fidelity of your innovation, but it's about thinking beyond one particular context and looking beyond that. And I think that those collaborative initiatives among funders would be what would create the bigger change that we all seek.
I just completed a term on the board at Grantmakers for Education. So this is a network in North America, largely American, about 300 funders, large funders whose names you would know, and local funders in places across Canada and the United States. And we benchmark the field. And so a report released this year about education philanthropy told us there are 3 big pendulum swings in education philanthropy in that context. One is increased investment in the early years and post-secondary. So a move away from what we would call the K-12 space. 2, a focus on what we might describe as whole child. And by whole child, a lot of attention to mental health, to social and emotional learning, and related issues. So a swing away from core academics. And 3rd, a swing away from national systems. Now, in part, that might be a reflection of the current administration, but I also think it's a response to the past decade of investment in the United States in particular. And so a deep focus on place, and by place, we mean cities and regions.
I would just highlight that I think that it's, first of all, we know that 80% of government budgets go to teacher salaries. And then you've got another 15% on top of that that's around other operational costs. The amount of money that systems have to really make big shifts and changes is tiny. It's small. That's where we can be that catalytic 1 degree, even though, the largest education donor in the world is the World Bank, and it still is dwarfed by domestic spending and revenue. So we have to be really careful about how big can you shift that. But 1 degree can be a very, very big shift. And in that sense, I think it's up to all of us in this room to be thinking about how do we make the education dollar or krona or whatever it might be, the education money go further. And some of that is completely reimagining how it is delivered. So if speed schools can give you in 10 months the same thing that you get in 3 years, what the hell are we doing? You know, I think it's questions like those that we really have to be saying, let's completely reimagine the system and push this institutional inertia in a different direction. Don't just go in momentum and sort of keep making small tweaks, but make the call for the bigger changes we need.
That's great. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.